You're watching Beyond Markets, where we bring you up to speed on development outcomes in Africa. Welcome. Many thanks for joining us. I'm Esther Awoniyi. On today's show, we'll explore how innovation can drive growth and improve health outcomes in Africa. As always, you can join the conversation on social media. Let me know what you think about the topics we discuss. And to do so, use the hashtag Beyond Markets. You can also send me a message to my Twitter handle. It's at Esther O. Awoniyi. Now, technological disruption is revolutionizing the entire business landscape across Africa. But is Africa's healthcare system left out in this trend? Osh Agabi, CEO of Koniku, joins me to explore how innovation can help drive growth and improve health outcomes in Africa. Osh, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
Before we take a deep dive into health, you obviously know how, and you continue to see how innovation is driving health development outcomes on the continent. We're seeing it in education, we're seeing it in technology, we're seeing it in health, we're seeing it in so many other sectors. And Africa is on this journey to leapfrog, using technological advancement to leapfrog and get better development outcomes. We're seeing that, as I said, in different sectors. But I'd just like you to share your thoughts on what you're seeing so far, some of the milestones, if you will, that the continent has achieved, and where you're seeing the most traction.
I think in general, what excites everyone about Africa is it's essentially a blank slate in that sense. There is an opportunity, like we have seen in the mobile industry. We've seen a country that had a very small number of fixed landlines move to a country that mobile phones are essentially pervasive. We've seen that in education with micro degrees, if you will, and how people access knowledge, right? And in the same thing, we will see in healthcare. So in terms of healthcare, just to imagine how much countries in Africa have a lot of people in a certain income bracket, that even if the government wants to spend money on these people to improve the state of your health, it's still quite difficult because the infrastructure is not there. The role that technology will play in this is that you can bring in a massive amount of technology that was developed in the West. You can apply them in new ways over here.
Now, speaking about technology being brought in from the West here, many times, and I've spoken to a number of analysts and experts in different fields, and they tell me that many times it's not usually that plug and play approach that works for Africa. We're seeing Africa beginning to develop African solutions by Africans, and we have some peculiar challenges here that we're not seeing solutions. Some of those challenges are also in developed markets, in developed economies, but solutions haven't come yet. But for some reason, Africans have been able to find solutions to some of those problems. Take financial inclusion for instance. We're seeing the fintechs stepping up on the innovation front and putting together products that are bringing those people in the informal sector into the formal sector. We're seeing that driving the financial sector. But just share your thoughts on how these African problems that we're seeing we're seeing the solutions being championed by Africans themselves.
Absolutely. I think the best placed people to find solutions to problems in general on the African continent are Africans, because they understand their culture, they understand the values, they understand how the people think. This is without question. When I say bringing technology from abroad or bringing technologies from the West and plugging it into the African system, I don't think it's just a matter of you bring a mobile phone in here and then you try to just, okay, this is how it works in America, this is how it works in Europe, and you imagine it's going to work in the same way here. There has to be a lot of innovations around business models. So essentially, how you deploy, how do you design contracts? What is the way people pay their bills? How do people like to receive their bills and such things? So the technology fundamentals are almost always the same, but the business model in how these things are deployed are different. Sometimes you might have fundamental changes in technology as well, and we are seeing a lot of that in Africa. Kenya, for instance, has seen a lot of innovation in that front. Here in Lagos, in Yaba, you've seen a lot of innovations in that front, and even you find a lot of Silicon Valley investors are beginning to see that in Africa, and you're seeing capital flowing from Silicon Valley into Africa to develop new solutions in that sense. So I think it's a hybrid, it's a conversation between developed markets and developing markets. And I think once people have their head in the right places, that yes, you need to work in tandem with local values, local customs, and really understand the people. I think a lot can be done. And the returns on investments are usually massive in comparison to other climes, if you will.
Now, if there's one sector that could and would benefit immensely from innovation is healthcare.
Absolutely.
Healthcare. I mean, just looking across the healthcare systems across Africa, we're still seeing very weak, systems, especially at the primary healthcare level. When we had the Ebola outbreak, we still have it's still in some parts of Africa. That exposed how weak, the systems were in terms of just manpower, just basic equipment. We see problems with that. And we know that many African countries, especially the smaller ones, the poorer ones, are the ones that continue to struggle with funding, lack of infrastructure, even lack of manpower, training, etc. But we're seeing a technological revolution happening. We're seeing it happening in a place, especially Nigeria. I'd like you to just speak to that point, this technological revolution we're seeing in the healthcare space and how it's transforming Africa from that place where, yes, the challenges are still there, but how it's transforming the continent from that place where it's completely helpless to one that now has, some kind of footing, if you will.
Yes. So yesterday I was talking to some colleagues at an event that was hosted by Platform Capital here in VI about how they are changing the way drugs are transported and how they are making sure that there are no counterfeit drugs flowing in the system. I found that model very interesting, because normally you would expect that, okay, you will bring in law enforcement, you will bring in all these regulations and so on and so forth. But what these guys have done is actually quite ingenious, just in the way they apply mobile telephony, how they design their warehouses to look like, how they source the drugs, how they barcode it, and how they ensure that what you're getting from the supplier is actually what ends up on the table of the patient. And if you look at that entire logistics and supply chain that they are building there, and you compare it with what you would have in America, what you have in Europe, you will probably not recognize, them as serving the same purpose, but it sounds more like what Amazon will do. But they're doing something like this in healthcare and making sure that people have the right drugs.
And let's talk about Koniku, your company, CEO of the company, and how you're using technology you're using innovation to revolutionize your space, the space that you play in. Talk to us about this revolution. Talk to us about how you're taking a different approach to diagnosing diseases.
So the way we view healthcare is essentially when a person is unwell, or when a person has an illness and you go to a doctor. What you go to a doctor to do is essentially to give the doctor data. So you have a lot of equipment that are plugged into a person to measure what you call biomarkers, if a person is ill or not. Once you collect all this data, all the biomarker data, then the doctor analyzes and prescribes a drug for the person, okay? So if you just break that down, what is happening is you take a diseased person, you take that person to the doctor connects a lot of sensors to the person, collects the data, the doctor analyzes the data, and the doctor makes a prescription. When you break that system down, you find that there's a lot of places where technology can play. So what we are doing at Koniku is we have built a new kind of sensor, a sensor that is based on synthetic biology that is merged with silicon, that allows you to analyze a person's breath and be able to take a measure or be able to make a statement about their state of health. You can be able to tell if they have malaria, for instance, if they have cholera, if they have diarrhea, or what have you, right? So when you have such a system in people's homes, and you can say for certain that somebody, with a degree of certainty rather, that somebody has malaria, you can take that data, put it into a database, for instance, build a healthcare marketplace where the patient is told you have malaria, and you can match that with a healthcare professional somewhere where malaria is, where a drug for malaria is recommended to the person. And that supply chain that I was talking about earlier, that's one reason why I find it very exciting, that this is already being built so that you could just the patient can order this drug and the patient is sure that the drug that is arriving at their table is the right drug indeed for malaria. And you can continue to measure the patient and be sure that the person gets the follow-on care that they need.
Many instances when we hear about, this type of innovations and, how much of a game changer it could be for the healthcare system. Issues or the questions around accessibility, affordability, come into the conversation. Could you speak to that point?
So in terms of accessibility, so we're not just looking at Africa, we're looking at India, we're looking at China. In fact, at our company, we believe that the future of healthcare will be decided by India, China, and Africa.
Why so?
Because you have in these countries a very fast-growing middle class, but the infrastructure to deliver top-rate healthcare. So there was a study we were doing in our company the other day that an average patient walks into a doctor's office in Switzerland, yes, they only have to wait less than 15 minutes, see a doctor for 30 minutes, get 400 data points. Whereas a patient has to wait for more than 3 hours in either India, China, or in Nigeria or South Africa. They have to wait for more than 3 hours to see a doctor for 8 minutes, and they get only about 30 data points in comparison to 400 data points that a Swiss patient gets. Now, the governments in this country or the healthcare systems in this country, it's not that they do not want to provide that level of healthcare access. But for them to do that, they have to increase healthcare spending by more than 2,000%, okay, over the period of the next 20 years, right? That is because they are trying to build the traditional systems that you have in the Western world, whereas that is not necessary. Today, we have technologies like diagnosing disease by breath. We have such technologies that allows you to bypass all of that, yes, but at least for the first level of screening. So 80% of most of the reasons why people go to the doctor around any particular country is mostly the same. Now, can you take all of that data, aggregate it, and be able to, on the back end, have a machine learning algorithm where you have a sensor, you collect the data, you're able to classify the data with machine learning, deliver the needed drugs to the patient. So by that already, you collapse a significant chunk of the healthcare needs of the populace, and you can focus on high-end needs of that populace.
Now, this all sounds very wonderful. I'm just wondering, in terms of how it will function on the ground. Let's, take a typical scenario here in Nigeria or Lagos, maybe in the rural areas. I'm just wondering, at the primary healthcare center, how would you be able to plug this technology in there? People are coming and the doctor understaffed and all of that, but how would that be able to plug into that system?
Awesome. So in terms of cost, right? So we are targeting, if you can afford a mobile phone. So if you can afford just a basic run-of-the-mill mobile phone, you should be able to afford our technology. So we have built a device with cost in mind, okay? Now, on the side of how patients use this or how people are able to use this, what you find in the case of Nigeria today is that they're actually already doing this. So Nigeria is a country with, we're meeting with some CEOs of major HMOs in this country yesterday, where they found that a lot of patients are already self-medicating. They just don't have the data to make the right decision, like, okay, do I have typhoid fever or do I have malaria, right? So the self-medication aspect is already there, right? So it comes in terms of user engagement or how the user interacts with this service. So you can imagine you have just 10 strips of the 10 most common diseases that people will run into. If a certain place goes red, you know this is the disease you have, and you can immediately press this button, and in 2 days, you can have these drugs shipped to you. So that level of simplicity is already built there. But this is part of understanding the environment where you want to play. And that's something as a kid.
The common illnesses.
Exactly. And this is data that people already have. The WHO has this data. A lot of the health insurance companies, they have this data because they have to pay for it. So already in this environment, people self-medicate a lot. The question is to deliver them the solution that allows them to make precise decisions. And I think this doesn't stop in Africa. This doesn't stop in China or India. This is a global phenomenon. So if you look at the Brexit, for instance, sorry to bring the Brexit into it. If you look at Brexit, for instance, one of the arguments as to why the British people elected to leave the EU was because they feared for their NHS, and their NHS is getting crowded. So even with the best funded systems on this planet, it's creaking under its own weight. If you look at America, for instance, you have healthcare deserts. Right? So in New York, you can see a doctor whenever you want, but people that are living in Middle America, there was an article in Washington Post the other day that showed that there are lots of people in America that live in essentially healthcare deserts. In France, it's the same. So yes, there are well-funded healthcare systems in the world, but still, the cost of funding, of paying for these healthcare systems, even in the developed world, so-called developed world, it's a real problem. And in the U.S. presidential elections, this has become a major issue for the presidential candidates when they're saying they want to have healthcare for all, and you're having costs of $24 trillion or $46 trillion to pay for this. So the ultimate solution to healthcare is building a genuine marketplace where you have the patient as the primary CEO of their healthcare, and everybody else is serving that patient around you. And to deliver that, you need three ingredients. The first ingredient you need is a good sensor that is able to collect data from patients and say exactly what is wrong with the patient. You need a networked system, yes, and you need a machine learning algorithm at the back of it to analyze all this data. And that is what we do in California at our offices every day.
Amazing stuff. If you're just joining us, Osh Agabi, CEO of Koniku, is our guest today, and we have been exploring ways innovation can help improve health outcomes on the continent. Osh, thank you so much for your time so far. Let's pick up from where we left off. You're talking about this, and it does sound quite amazing, actually, especially the number of diseases that can be, diagnosed using this device that you're powering with technology. But tell us where at what point are you in the conversations you're having? You say you've spoken to some health management organizations. Are you talking to the government? What are your hopes? What are you trying to put together in terms of how you want to put this out into the market?
So we imagine a lot of partnerships. So yesterday, for instance, I was lucky enough to give a talk to the Nigerian Medical Society here in Idiaraba in Luth. And the response that we have gotten from that has been nothing short of phenomenal. It was overwhelmingly positive. And the conversations that we have had with the HMOs and the insurance companies have been overwhelmingly positive. Ultimately, we want to sell our devices directly to the consumers. We want the consumers to be able to get access to our devices. The same way that if you want, you can buy a mobile phone that has a contract on it, or you can buy a mobile phone that is completely free. Fundamentally, what Koniku is about is that we can directly allow the patient or the user to be the one in the driver's seat. Now, if they choose to do it other ways, that is also totally fine. So in the case of the partnerships we're establishing with the HMOs, for instance, they have told us that, okay, if you can detect this number of diseases, it would really massively reduce the amount of premium that people have to pay based on their health outcomes. But of course, in the end, this is a decision that the patients themselves have to make. On the doctor side, helping the doctors understand that this journey is not a journey to replace you, but it's a journey to form a partnership where you can interact more with the patient. Yes, not just, okay, you have to see one patient and then move to the next.
It's not just the doctors, sorry about it. There's the diagnostic centers where you go in for, for them to take blood samples and check for these diseases that are already, that the patient can now do themselves.
Exactly. So for us, even we get to a stage where we're screening first and there's need to do more confirmatory tests. You can imagine you go there to the screening centers and the screening centers will do more tests as required.
So I'm just wondering, you also talking to the government also, and how soon can we see this being rolled out? One, two, affordability. I come back to that point. People who are watching this conversation right now are going to be asking themselves, is this something that I can afford? Obviously, it's revolutionary, but can I afford it?
Yes. So on the part of the government side, we still need to demonstrate efficacy. So it's a device. There's a device play there. There's a marketplace play there. So on the regulatory side, we have to make sure that every law that is on the book, we respect them. Yes, I know that we're a Silicon Valley company and all of that, but when we come into Lagos or we come into Nigeria or we're in China or we're in India, every law on the book, we have to make sure that they're respected and they are obeyed, right? So the government has a regulatory role to play in this, and that is something we look forward to engaging with all those folks on. In terms of affordability, we are targeting the global middle class. right? This is not just a product for the US, or it's not just a product for Europe, it's a product for a global audience. Yes, we are starting from these emerging economies because they have an urgent unmet need, okay? But the goal here is, if you can afford a mobile phone, you can afford our device. So people that are earning anywhere from $10,000 per annum to people that are earning $40,000 per annum. And in these countries that I just mentioned, so China, India, South Africa, and Nigeria, there is a strong middle class there that you can directly sell this device.
Any plans in the future to go lower than that?
Absolutely.
Than the middle class?
Absolutely. This comes with scale. Right.
Okay.
So right now, in terms of how we scale our device, how we make our products, it's still quite expensive, I must say, right? So the journey for us as a company over the next 2 years is to massively reduce the cost of making a single device as we build this marketplace and begin to directly engage with the consumers. Remember, for us, our goal is really straightforward. We want to empower the patient or the user to be the one deciding on the future of their health, because ultimately they know their body best.
So, but one more question on that point too. I know that is a goal, but for the big picture, the way that could actually change the way we diagnose, or how we diagnose diseases, if we do see the patients doing it themselves, and then how this also changes the doctor-patient relationship. If this takes root, so if the patient is able to diagnose whatever it is they have, then going to the doctor, I'm just wondering what kind of scenario, how does that change? How would that change Nigeria's healthcare system if it does take root?
So when it takes root, what we imagine is you have a patient, yes, he has a diagnosis of a disease, but there's a law in this country that certain drugs can only be gotten via prescription.
Absolutely.
So it is not possible for us to ship certain drugs to people. This is just, it's not allowed, yes. So what happens, that's why we want to create a marketplace, an ecosystem where, yes, the patient is at the center, but the community surrounding that patient includes verified doctors. So the doctor understands the principle of how our technology works. That was why I felt very, very honored to give a talk to the Nigerian Medical Society yesterday and explain to them our intention, and we had this very, very positive response.
So there was a broad buy-in?
Exactly. There was a very broad buy-in. So the doctor understands the basics of how this technology works. So this is a technology that has been in research and peer-reviewed in countries like Israel, in the US, in the UK, as to how you can diagnose diseases from breast or other volatile organic compounds that human beings emit. So the science on that is solid, it's peer-reviewed, and it's been understood for quite a while. What we bring to it is a technology that allows you to do this at scale.
Okay.
So when the doctor sees the data, he understands the basis from which this data is coming from. And in the end, in this marketplace, this indeed free marketplace for healthcare, a genuine free marketplace for healthcare, the doctor is able to see the origin of that data, and in the end, in our marketplace, the doctor signs off on it before the patient is able to get that drug. Now, if the doctor chooses to still see that patient, they can broker through our platform. They can broker that, and the doctor and the patient, they will have an interaction that is more meaningful instead of an interaction that is still, you have to go to do some blood tests, do some blood work. Of course, you can still do that for verification purposes and all of that. But the goal here is to, what can be automated, let us automate it and make the interaction between the patient and the doctor a lot more meaningful.
Now, when you look into the future, what does the future of healthcare look like to you? Let's restrict that to the African continent now, the level that we're at right now, because obviously we're trying to leapfrog. Technology is helping us to do that. Kind of product that you're putting on the table can help the African continent do that. But like I said, there's still pockets, especially the lower income countries, that are still struggling. There's going to be a lower class that won't be able to afford, things like this that are, powered by innovation and technology. But when you look into the future, what do you see, for the future of health? Do you see us continuing to leapfrog at a faster pace or at the same pace?
So I think in everything that you see in technology, anything that has to be built, there's always a lot of details. I always shy away from using the word leapfrog because it suggests a certain speed that is unrealistic. Right. But here's what I will wager on, right? I think it doesn't make sense to try and build a system like the NHS or a system like what you have in the US or wherever. I think it doesn't make sense. Like when we started at the top of this conversation, right? There are realities on ground that people have to look at in a very dispassionate and a cold way, if you will, and look at what are the actual facts on ground. If you wanted to build a healthcare system from ground using the technologies that exist today, how would you go about it? That is what we're talking about here. And I think in the future, you will see a healthcare system, if it's done in a rational, in a careful way, you will see a healthcare system where a lot of the normal healthcare burdens that a lot of the countries see, yes, a lot of that will be automated or should be automated. In fact, they must be automated for it to make sense. Now, things that are emerging threats, yes, this is what you now have this healthcare teaching hospitals to deal with, like things that actually require a patient to be present, that require a patient to do more and the doctors to do more, then that is what you have the larger, heavy industry healthcare systems to do. But the lower level things, the reasons why people go to the hospitals most frequently today, that should be taken off the table and it should be automated because there are tools to automate it today.
Interesting, great stuff. Osh, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for talking to us today.
Thank you for
having
having me.
on the show today. I've been speaking to Osh Agabi. He's the CEO of Koniku. Well, that's it on Beyond Markets. Thank you so much for being a part of it. Remember, you can watch the show at 5 p.m. West African time daily and have access to all previous episodes of Beyond Markets on our website. That's cnbcafrica.com. You can also stay engaged with the hashtag Beyond Markets. And of course, you can send your thoughts and your comments to my Twitter handle too. It's at Esther Awoniyi. For myself and the team, it's bye for now.